go. Oh, say, but I'm glad, I'm glad. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Jesus has come and my cup's overrun. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Great singing. Hey, these three ladies right here in this row, they win the award for the biggest smiles during the song. They were smiling big. Good job, ladies. I should have had you come up here and turn around for me, but you might have been smiling and red at that point. All right, I want you to get your Bibles out tonight. Obviously, we're here to pray together, and we're going to do that, but we're going to look at a passage of Scripture that I hope will be an encouragement to you. It was an encouragement to my heart as I looked over it again today. 1 Samuel, chapter number 3. We're going to go here to 1 Samuel, chapter number 3 tonight. And just briefly look at a couple decisions that Samuel made. Samuel lived during a very interesting time in the nation of Israel, and there were quite a few changes that were going on during his time. And I don't know if you've noticed, but have you ever stopped and just thought about how quickly things have changed in the past few months? I know technology changes rather rapidly, and we can go back and see just maybe in your lifetime all the things that have taken place with technology and things like that. But just think of things in our world that have changed really in less than a year. I mean, things maybe that people just took for granted, that people did not think anything of, maybe worries that people have that maybe weren't at the top of their list of worries. And in so many ways, when we look at our world, it just seems like the ground is shifting around us. I mean, you could say that's true politically. We could say that's true economically with all that's happening. And I mean, we just thought we were in debt as a nation, and we just keep piling up more and more. And maybe you had security in a job, and now you kind of wonder, how long is this going to last? And so with all that is changing, the one thing we need is real wisdom. Because even today, yet last night and today, I was really praying. I called and talked to the deacons and just got some of their input. What do we do? And the truth is, I came to the conclusion, I can't really make a good decision as far as that goes. I mean, whichever way, somebody is going to say, well, you should cancel services. And then when you cancel services, somebody says, well, you shouldn't have canceled services. And our desire is to be wise, and yet recognize there's a lot that's changing around us. How can we keep up with all that's happening? And so I want us to look at the life, just really an overview of Samuel's life, because really what was happening during Samuel's life, there was a lot of change that was going on. Samuel could look behind him, and at this time, Israel's judges have begun disappearing. Before Samuel, ahead of him lies kings. The kings began to appear, but they're not here yet. And so Samuel's at really an interesting time in the nation of Israel. The judges are disappearing, but they're not all gone yet. Kings are coming on the scene, but they're not in place yet. And here we find Samuel. And he is stuck between what we could say is this old model, and he's right there during a time when this new model of governing is introduced. It's there. It's kind of getting in place, but now what is going to happen? And so he's there. He is ready. He's waiting. For each of our children that have been born, including Kaylee, we have had a midwife that has been involved in the process. And the first 7 children were pretty much all delivered by the same midwife. She became like one of the family, And so we had her cell phone number, and we'd call her, and she would tell us, because how quickly my wife would go into labor, she'd tell us, as soon as you begin to have a labor pain, call me. Because there was twice she barely made it to the hospital. I mean, from the moment we entered the hospital door until I believe it was Lily was born was 24 minutes. And so she said, listen, don't wait. Don't call into the number. Call my cell phone number. I'll immediately I'll hit the road. And there was one time she walked in the room and one of the babies was coming and she said, Candace, can you please at least let me get something ready? Can I just put my keys away and can you give me a chance? And we chuckled about that. But just like she was ready and she was there waiting to deliver those children, Kaylee, we had a new midwife, but same thing. She was ready and waiting to deliver this new baby. And in a sense, that's what we see Samuel doing. Samuel is here during a time when judges are going off the scene, the kings are about to be put in place, and Samuel's kind of in this shifting ground time. And I can tell you this, it wasn't always easy for him. And so I want you to see 3 decisions that Samuel made. And when I look at some decisions he made, and I was reviewing these today, I said to myself, that I would have that same response that Samuel had. So I want you to notice, 1 Samuel chapter 3 is where we are. I'm going to read the first 10 verses. We're actually going to look at about 3 different passages here in Samuel. But 1 Samuel chapter number 3, a familiar story, but let's review here. It says, and the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli. And the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision, and it came to pass at that time, when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see. And ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. And he ran unto Eli and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not. Lie down again. And he went back and lay down, and the Lord called yet again, Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the 3rd time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. You know, we know that story well, and really we can look at Samuel's life in some different portraits, some different pictures. As a young man here, as an older man in different decisions that he's making. But here at this time, as a young man, Samuel does not understand what is going on. He doesn't quite understand all that is happening. And Samuel really is going to lay some footprints for us about what do we do in times that things are changing so rapidly. All that is going around us, it's hard to wrap your mind and keep up with it. Okay, so we go to God's Word and we see a principle from someone who's been there. Someone who has experienced that same thought. I don't know what your response would have been, but what if you're laying asleep tonight and you hear a voice that calls your name out? You're probably going to think it's your wife. Like, what do you want? You know, maybe one of your kids calling you saying, I need some help. Samuel has no idea what's going on. And we kind of know the story. And so we kind of, all right, Samuel, this is God calling. Samuel didn't know that. Samuel doesn't understand what is going on. And the Lord calls out to him. We read there in verse number 10, and says, Samuel, Samuel. And based upon what Eli has said, look at his response. He says here in verse number 10, Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. Speak, for thy servant heareth. So think about this. Middle of the night, 2 a.m. I don't know what you're doing at 2 a.m., but I am in La La Land, okay? And something happens that startles you, or one of your children, you know, I have one child that walks in their sleep, and I can hear their footprints or footsteps, and I've got to try to figure out where they are. And so I'll get up and I'll start walking through the house. And on a few occasions, I have been quite startled walking in a room. It's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that person there. I won't tell you who that is, but Evie's not here tonight, so it wouldn't matter. But, I'm like trying to find her, find out where she is. And sometimes she is sitting in the middle of her bedroom floor and she's just searching through stuff, trying to find it. Other times she has woken Chloe up and Chloe's like, Dad, I need help here. I don't know what to do. And we've kind of learned, you just say to Evie, no, Evie, it's time to go to bed. And she goes back to bed. But if you were to voice in the middle of the night that called your name out just as a boy here, and he springs out of bed not knowing what to do, like, what's happening? But notice his response. As a young man, he says in verse number 10, it's like, Lord, speak, I'm listening. Oh, let me tell you, we can learn some things from the testimony of Samuel. In changing times when we don't understand, here's the first principle I want you to write down, okay? When you don't understand, you can always pray. When you don't understand, you can always pray. In essence, is that not what Samuel does? When we hear from God, which is, we have this revealed word to us, how do we respond to God? Well, that's what prayer is all about. That's why we meet on Wednesday nights. That's why we take time to pray, because we want to hear from God, and then we want to talk to God. There is communication that goes on. You ever been on the end of a one-sided conversation? Somebody just talks, and you try to get a word in, and you're in trouble. That'll get us to the next point here in just a minute. But notice what he does. He doesn't understand what's going on. And so through the encouragement of Eli, he says, Eli perceives this is the Lord talking to him. So Eli says, here's what you say. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. In essence, God is talking to Samuel and Samuel talks to God. What a picture of what we can do during times we don't understand. I'm thankful for this book right here. Because if I did not have this book right here, I don't know that I'd know what to do. I mean, what am I going to base my decisions on? I think this fact has already been settled. You can't believe the media. And so, who do you trust? Well, maybe you trust this religious leader or this religious person or this spiritual leader. And then you've come to find out that they've been involved in things. You're like, oh, I cannot believe they're doing that. Who do I listen to? What do I do? Well, here's what Samuel does, and here's what you can do. You can pray. Have you ever said these words, Lord, I just don't know what to do? You know how many times I said those words yesterday and today? Lord, I don't know what to do. I don't want to make a wrong decision here. I don't want to be the guy they put on the news that says, pastor does not love his congregation and puts them at risk and goes ahead with services, I don't want to be that guy. And on the other hand, I know what God's commanded us to do, and I don't want to live in fear, and you want to have a balance there. But when you don't know what to do, aren't you thankful? I stepped outside today and I was like, Lord, I don't know what to do. Lord, you got to help. When you don't understand, we can pray. As you look at the book of 1 Samuel, and as the book opens, you're going to see some good examples of listening and some bad examples of listening. Samuel not only prays, but he's willing to listen. And that was the challenge. You say, speak, Lord, but then you let him know, Lord, I'm listening. Oftentimes, don't we do this? We'll speak to the Lord, but then we don't stop and listen to what he has to say to us. We kind of tell him what we think he should do. Maybe that's happened politically. Well, Lord, this is what I think you should have done in our country. This is what should have been best. This is what should have happened. And it's almost like, then we go like this, Lord, I'm not going to listen if you don't agree with what I say. So there's some good examples of listening. There's also some bad examples. You remember first, as the book opens, the first example of listening was Hannah. Hannah there at the beginning of the book, she is in tears. She is day after day really lamenting the fact that she's not able to have children. And she's got a request. We'll look at that here in just a moment. But her husband, on the other hand, If you look at the story, you're going to have to say this. He was not the best listener. Do you remember what he did? She comes as a loving wife, and she's really upset. She is really burdened that she can't have children. And the typical husband. What's the matter? What's wrong? And she tells him, she kind of bares her heart to him. And I'm just going to paraphrase his response. Hey, am not I better than 10 sons? I mean, you've got me. I mean, come on. That's what he says. If you look at the passage, that's what he says. Like, am I not better to you than 10 sons? And I'm going to be the first to say I've been guilty of this. Like, honey, look what you have. What more do you need? And she's like, really, do you want me to answer that question? But he's not a good listener. He's already got his mind made up. He is already going to say, I've got this figured out. I mean, listen, I understand you want children, but listen, look who you're married to. Can I just tell you, that's not good listening? But think of what she does. She goes to her preacher, Eli. She goes to the priest, and he sees her in tears and sorrow. And what does he think? He thinks she's drunk. Man, this lady's lost her marbles. What's wrong with her? And sometimes preachers aren't good listeners either. Got preconceived ideas about things. But then there's that good example that we read about, and that was Samuel. I think Hannah really, as she pours her heart out, she's really she wants an answer for this. But think about the good example of Samuel. And here he is, a young man, but a man. He's a man's man, and we can see that really from his life. And so listen, a challenge to us men tonight. Could I encourage you that God does want us to be good listeners? Sometimes we try to have things figured out, but Samuel was a good listener. And so continue on a little bit later in his life. Here he is. We could go to chapter number 8. Now Samuel is an old man. He has been really a very good judge for decades. But now, remember what the people ask for in chapter number 8? They want a king. Stop for a minute. Have you ever stopped and put yourself in Samuel's place? What would you have been thinking? What's wrong with me? What have I done? I mean, I have been doing that. That's right. You'd think that those people just came up and, man, slapped him in the face. Samuel's like, what's wrong with what I've done? But they want a king. And so what does Samuel do? He prays. Once again, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't know what I've done to deserve this. I don't know where I went wrong, but Samuel prays. And God agrees with Samuel. You know what? I don't like the people's request. I don't think the king is the best for them. That's not what I want. But do you remember what God said to Samuel? I want you to listen to the people. It takes a good listener to be able to do that. And even sometimes when someone says the wrong thing, sometimes it's hard to be a good listener, and yet, do you know oftentimes that's what God wants us to do? Listen. I remember oftentimes my parents telling me there's a reason why God gave you one mouth and two ears, so you can listen twice as much as you talk. But be a good listener. And it's sometimes very tempting to maybe think that your way is the right way and everybody else's way is the wrong way. And we get this temptation to think, well, why isn't everyone else thinking the way I think? And the truth is, we are going to find out when we get to heaven, there were plenty of things we were wrong about too. And so in changing times, I think we need some individuals that really are mighty in praying and mighty in listening. When Samuel doesn't understand as a young man, when Samuel doesn't understand as an old man, we see throughout his life, there's some things he does. He prays and he listens. There's times when people agree with him. There's times when people don't agree with him. Don't you think that's a good principle we can live by in the days that we live in? Let's be mighty in prayer. Let's be mighty listeners. But go with me to 1 Samuel chapter number 8. We mentioned this chapter here just a moment ago. And I want you to see a second principle. Look at verse 1 through 9 in 1 Samuel chapter number 8. And it came to pass when Samuel was old, so he's old now, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Man, sounds like some politicians today. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. There's this first characteristic again. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people. Listen to them in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all thy works, which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they also unto thee. Now therefore, hearken unto their voice. Howbeit, yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Really, in 1 Samuel chapter number 8, we see a very powerful moment, and really try to put your mind around what Samuel is thinking at this time, and then we're going to get into the principle that he's going to live by. He's lived a long life, and we could say that he has an exceptional service record. I mean, his track record, he's proven himself. He's been a very faithful servant. There is no season of time that he has gone out and just, gone off his rocker, just done something wild and crazy. There's been really no deviations from what God has placed him there to do. He really has been head and shoulders above everyone else in Israel in the position that God has given to him. If he were living today, he'd be the guy they named a road after. Put his name on the outside of a stadium. Named some important thing. This is Samuel. This is the guy who has been faithful, and he has judged people. Very faithful. Even his mentor, Eli, he surpassed him. Eli has made some decisions that were not right. But how faithful he has been. How do you think he felt when they come and say this to him? Samuel, you're old. Your time's up. We want a king. I don't know about you, but as I read that, I thought to myself, I'd be a little ticked off. What's wrong with the job I've done? What's wrong with my faithful track record? Would you like to see all the awards that I have been given, all the recommendations, all those good things? And so, once again, Samuel prays, and the Lord tells him how to really respond to what is developing around him. Here's the second principle. Not only when we don't understand does God want us to pray and listen, but secondly, Samuel quiets his own words, and he speaks the Lord's words to the people. That is an excellent principle to remember. It is so easy for us. I know at this time, I can tell you, because if I put myself in Samuel's shoes, there's some things I would have said to those people. I kiddingly say, that would be the evangelist coming out in me. The evangelists, they say they can blow in, blow up, and blow out. They don't have to worry about it. And sometimes there's things that, you just sit there and people say things and you're like, okay, if I really could say to them right now what I really want to say, but that wouldn't be very pastoral to say that. I'm sure there's some things Samuel really wants to say to these people. He's got a flesh just like you do and like I do. And he's really thinking, this isn't right. This isn't fair. This is not the way things are supposed to happen. So here's what the Lord tells him. Samuel, don't say your words because they can get you in trouble. And I think, when I think of our president and all that's going on right now, one thing I think that has really above all gotten our president in trouble? Saying his own words without really thinking about what he was saying. And some people that's really fired him up for good. Some people that's really fired him up. Do you know one thing we can learn is this? Words do have consequences. And we need to be careful what we say. The Lord's going to tell Samuel how to look at this and what to say to the people. You've got to know that Samuel's hurt. You got to know in a way that he's angry. You got to know that he's like, oh, this is not right. But here's what he does. He speaks the Lord's words. Look at verse number 10. It's very important. You've seen what's happened up to this point. Put yourself in his shoes and then look what happens. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. Listen, I'll tell you how to stay out of trouble, okay? And make sure the Lord's on your side. Just tell people what the Lord said. Now, are there going to be consequences for what they've asked for? Yes. But that's not Samuel's problem. That's going to be their problem. All Samuel does is Samuel does exactly what the Lord tells him to do. I don't know that Samuel can handle this situation on his own. And so in a way, it's going through Samuel's mind, oh man, if I said this or if I did this, maybe then this would change. Maybe I can get the people to change their mind. But I want you to put yourself in the situation we find ourselves in. Have you caught yourself saying some things, maybe trying to solve or figure out things that are happening? I've done that in the past few weeks. Well, maybe if this happened, or maybe if this takes place, or maybe if this will all get worked out. Have you stopped to think for a minute that the Lord might have a plan that just might work? I know that's hard for us to figure out, but have you stopped to think for a minute that in all that's going on politically in our world, the Lord may just have a plan that's going to work out? And we kind of chuckle at that like, hello, we know that's true. He knows exactly what he's doing. And he has a reason why he's doing it. So we've been where Samuel's been. Samuel does not have to get his way. Samuel doesn't have to say everything that's on his mind. I believe this is what David refers to when God said about David, David had a right spirit within him. Sometimes that is having the right disposition, asking the Lord to give you the right words to say at the right time, and not being just whatever, not just saying whatever comes to mind. We need people like that in changing times. Just the friendships that have been hurt, testimonies that have been ruined, because instead of just be quiet and ask the Lord, Lord, what is it that you would have me to say? What is it? What words can I say that would really let them know that I love you and I love them, and we need some people like that. I think Samuel is an example of that in the Old Testament. Another example would be Moses. Paul was an example in the New Testament. And so be open to change, things that could be happening, even though we don't understand them. Be flexible. When I was a youth pastor and assistant pastor out in Pennsylvania, there was another assistant pastor on staff at the church that I was there. And we'd go into the pastor's office and he'd give us things to do. And they were totally different than what we thought. And so I remember one Christmas, we talked about how you got to be flexible in the ministry. So I purchased him. I got online, I think it was on eBay. How many remember this years ago, there was a little flexible little toy called Gumby. He was a little green guy, and you could bend his legs and his arms every which way. Well, I got online and I ordered Brother Feathers. He was the other pastor. I ordered him one. and got it for him for Christmas, and it'd sit on his desk. And so after the meeting with what we thought we were going to do that got changed, I'd kind of walk into his office, or he'd walk into my office, and we'd sit down. And I remember one of us would pick that little Gumby doll up, and we'd just twist him all different ways, and we'd set him there, and be like, well, I guess we'll figure this out as we go along. You got to be flexible. And so that's what he's showing Samuel. Samuel, listen, things are changing. Let's have some flexibility here. So look with me back one chapter, 1 Samuel chapter number 7. 1 Samuel chapter number 7. Look at verse number 20. Let's see here. Maybe I wrote the wrong verse here. Just a second. Let me see if I can find this here. It's the passage about, let me see if it's 2 Samuel. No? Verse 23. It is the, I know the verses, so I'll just tell them. It's where Samuel really has a positive outlook, and he sets up the stone of remembrance. Remember that passage? I had it written down as 1 Samuel 7, verse number 23, but that is not right. If you find it, let me know. But he names it Ebenezer. And we know the name Ebenezer means the Lord has helped us. And I believe Samuel does that because he has had the Lord's help in his outlook, even in his disposition. And he is able to see things in a way that I believe God has helped him see. So what was happening in that passage of Scripture? And I was going to look. Verse 12, okay. Why did I write verse 23? 7, verse number 7, 12?
Yeah, then Samuel took a stone.
Oh, there it is. Okay, so I was in chapter 7. I just wrote the wrong. Okay, so pick up verse number 12 there. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shen, and called the name of it Ebenezer, saying, Hitherto hath the Lord helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and they came no more into the coast of Israel, and the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. All right, just a brief overview what's happening in this chapter. Samuel has called Israel together. They're having really a prayer meeting. The Philistines hear about it. They're going to come in, and they want to crash this party. And they're going to come in. They're going to try to wreak havoc, and they're going to try to battle the Israelites. In the battle, the Lord thunders against the Philistines, and they really scatter. They just scatter. God does that. And so there in verse number 12, Samuel sets up a stone of remembrance. He calls it Ebenezer, which means the Lord hath helped us. Think about that. That day did not go as planned. They went in having different ideas about what was going to take place. Who would have thought that that was going to happen? But Samuel chose to see the events of that day in light of really what God was doing in Israel. Really, for Israel's history, they've been abused, they've been attacked, they've been mistreated, they have lived oftentimes defeated. There was rarely a day that they came home and it was like, wow, that was a good day, you know. They had a lot of things that they faced, but through it all, through every situation, the Lord's helped them. And once again, chapter number 7, the same is true. And so Samuel, instead of focusing on all the bad, oh, woe is me, think of all that's happened, Samuel's going to focus on the good. And he says, listen, I want you to remember, I want you to call to attention this uplifting fact that the Lord has helped us all along the way. And instead of saying, you know, his words, he's going to try to encourage them through what the Lord has done. And he wants that to really change their focus during turbulent times. Change their perspective. Show them what is important. So he prays and he listens. He quiets his words and speaks the words of the Lord. And there's a third thing that he does. I want you to go to chapter number 4. I want you to look at one verse here, and then we'll go back to chapter number 7. Look at 1 Samuel 4, verse number 21. It says, and the name of the child, and she named the name of the child Ichabod, saying, the glory is departed from Israel because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, the glory is departed from Israel for the ark of God is taken. I think in this we really see Samuel's determination not to quit. So notice kind of what takes place. He is really going to live a life that is focused on never giving up. Look at chapter 7. I mentioned chapter 7. Go back there and go down to verse number 16. It says, "And he went from year to year in circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah and judged Israel in all those places." So just an overview of both of those stories there. Think what's happened. It's a horrible day. Chapter number 4, the events that are going to take place are really sad of what's going to happen. Eli the priest has 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They're really away in war with the Philistines. Phinehas' wife is due any minute. A messenger arrives from this battle and he says, there's no good news. All he has is bad news. It's all terrible. The Hebrews have been slaughtered. Hophni and Phinehas have been killed. They're dead. Worst of all, here's the worst, the Philistines have captured the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence in their midst. And in the midst of getting that news, the priest Eli, at 98 years old, falls over backward and dies on the spot. When Phinehas' wife sees the events and she hears about them, she goes into labor, delivers a son, and names him Ichabod. I'm glad my mom didn't do that to me. Which means the glory of the Lord has departed. She names him, and then she dies. I don't know about you, but that's a bad day, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to make light of the fact, but think of all that's happened on that day. Do you know that's the day Samuel becomes judge? That day. I mean, think about that. How would you like to begin your career like that? I mean, that's what kicks it all off. It goes from that, Eli's gone, Samuel takes over. And the truth is, listen, things don't get much better. Throughout his life, Samuel's days don't get much better in judging Israel. He's faithful at it, but he doesn't, remember the song? He doesn't ever, I think, have a day where he wakes up and says, oh, what a beautiful morning. Everything's going my way. That doesn't happen. I mean, it is bad, bad, bad. But you know what Samuel was during this time in Israel's history? Listen, he was an anchor. He was someone they knew they could trust. He was someone that judged faithfully. He was rock solid. That brings us to chapter 7 in verse number 16 of the verse we read. Here's what he has done faithfully, year after year. He has traveled around. He has visited different places. He has stayed on task. He's worked hard. He's not lived lazy. He has constantly gone through. He has judged people. He has served people in their bad days and in the few good days that he had. Samuel was as faithful and as predictable as they come. And we need people like that. You know what he did? He just stayed in the fight. Do you think Samuel ever had a day where he thought about quitting? He stayed in the fight. He just kept on going. And now, once again, at the end of his life, it seems like, boy, everybody's against him. But he just keeps going. You know, it's sad to me. One thing over the past, months with God's people that is discouraging is how many have just quit. Really quit on God. Well, this wasn't fair. This shouldn't have happened. You know what Samuel does? Think about this. He's, as I mentioned at the beginning, he's at that time where judges are moving off the scene. Kings are coming on the scene. That wasn't, God's plan for them. God said, this is not what I've chosen. It's what you people want. I'm going to give you what you want. But think about the man that Samuel is. You know what he does? He understands this, and he's going to do his best to transition this time for the nation of Israel. He's going to do his best. And you know how many kings he anoints? 2. He anoints Israel's first 2 king. And after all the things that people had done to him, after the things that they have said about him, after all of his faithfulness that really kind of just got brushed aside, well, we don't care about all those years of faithful service. He holds back his opinions. He keeps his mouth closed. And he does what the Lord had called him there to do. And I think if we're really going to survive and thrive during times like these, I think those principles can help us. Pray and be willing to listen. Secondly, if you notice his life, notice that instead of saying what he wants, he says, I'm going to speak the words the Lord has. And that's what we need to do today. Here's what the Lord said, and here's why we do that. But thirdly, don't quit. God's not quit on us. Let's not quit on him. Have you ever noticed the day after a football game? You ever listen to the sportscasters, the radio? They call them the Monday morning quarterbacks. Sunday's games have been played. And then all these guys, back in their heyday, they were prime. They're going to talk about everything the quarterback and this player did wrong and why this play didn't work and why this coach did that. Have you ever sat there and thought to those people, just keep your mouth closed? You didn't play in that game. You don't know everything that happened. But boy, they like to play it all out. I think when Samuel comes on the scene, really, the nation of Israel is at a turbulent time. Nobody had really given thought to establishing peace. The Israelites themselves were just all over each other, vicious, really, towards each other. And what he does is he's able to transition those people. He is able almost, we could say obviously with the Lord's help, but single-handedly from a bunch of tribes that are bickering back and forth to really very soon, within a generation or two, becoming one of the most powerful nations in their generation, in their time. He was the glue that held them together. You know what Faith Baptist Church needs? People just like that. They're willing to have it. One preacher called it stick-to-itiveness. I know that's not a word, but they stick together. They're going to stick together through thick and thin. Obviously, our future depends upon the Lord. But while we're here waiting on God, you know what He's doing? He's waiting on us to see if we're going to be faithful. One thing that could be said about Samuel, he was faithful. Faithfully served the Lord. Faithfully proclaimed the words of the Lord. Faithfully was obedient to what God said. And I hope on that day where we see our last sunrise, on that day where we're not going to meet together no more, on that day where there's no more COVID, on that day when there's no more political things that we face, you know what? I hope the record shows that we can say we were faithful to a God who was always faithful to us. How can we do that? Well, 3 ways. And I hope they'll be an encouragement to you. They've been encouragement to me. We can pray. We can speak the words of the Lord. And we can stay faithful to the end. Don't start strong. Be willing to finish strong too. Father, I pray that you would help us in a time where the world just seems to be changing. It's not day by day. It almost seems moment by moment. You never know what's going to happen next on the political scene. You never know what's going to happen in the life even of believers and even in our church. We really don't know day to day. I didn't, wake up yesterday or today thinking, well, we're going to have to cancel this and we're not going to be able to have this. The truth is, Lord, I pray that you would help us to be a people that are faithful during trying times. And help us to stick together. Help us to stay faithful to you. Help us to really stop and think about the words that you'd have us to say. And most importantly, may we say your words. Obviously, we know that those words will endure forever. Your word and the souls of men are eternal. And so I pray that we'd be concerned about those things and we'd be faithful to those things. And I pray that you would help us to be a church that really prays and listens. There's people that are hurting that need someone to listen to them. We like to give people our opinion, but what they may need is just for us to listen and pray with them and pray and talk to you. So would you help us? I don't know what will happen this next week. I mean, it just seems like every scenario has been put on the table. I don't even know what to think, except I know that you're in control and I know your plan is already in place. And we can trust you. So help us to be faithful to do those things that Samuel did, that others throughout history have done. And I pray that you'd help us tonight. Thank you for folks that are here tonight. I know some that aren't able to be here. I pray that you bring healing and comfort and help. Give us wisdom on Sunday in our services. I pray that you'd help there. And would you continue to encourage us? Pray that you continue to protect us health-wise. And help us no matter what, to keep our eyes on you, to keep our hand on the plow and just keep on keeping on. Obviously, there's coming a day. It'll be our last day here on this earth. And whenever that is, I pray that we'd be able to say we remain faithful. Never quit on a God who remained faithful to us. Guide us now. Next few moments as we spend time praying with each other and for each other. In Jesus' name.